David's our real-life Indiana Jones, and most of you have seen him or feel you know him already.
Yes.
He's a captivated speaker and the author of over 20 books. David has traveled the world several times over, seeking adventure and answers to the mysteries of mankind's past. His theories about ancient civilizations, being contacted by extraterrestrials, they have become extremely popular in the past few years. And he's appeared on countless TV shows and numerous conferences. He's best known for his frequent appearances on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens series. So please welcome David Childress.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks to Noe and everybody at the Edinburg Arts Festival Council to invite me. First time to come here to this part of Texas. I was in Brownsville back in the 80s, but I didn't make it here to McAllen or Edinburgh area. Tell you a little bit about myself first. Since I've been on the Ancient Aliens series, which is going on 9 years now, and still going strong, I think. It's been surprisingly popular. And now when I go to the airport, people do tend to recognize me. And they'll come up to me and they'll say, "You're that guy on the Ancient Aliens show, aren't you?" And I'll say, yeah, that's probably me. And then they say, "What's with that guy's hair?" And I'll say, I don't know, that's Giorgio. And Giorgio's a great guy, by the way. We're very good friends, and I've known Giorgio since before Ancient Aliens, and Eric von Däniken, too. And Eric's a fun guy, too. He's in his 80s now. This time last year, Eric and I were in Australia, actually, doing some things. And I was born actually in France. My parents are Americans. I grew up in Colorado and later in Montana. I went to high school. My parents liked to travel. My father's a lawyer, actually. And so as a kid, we would go down to Mexico City and we'd climb the pyramids at Teotihuacan. That was very exciting. We'd go to Hawaii and we would go to England and Stonehenge. We went on trips to Greece and Turkey. And that really got me going. I love archaeology. Like you, I like paranormal, the unexplained. I've always been interested in UFOs and Bigfoot and Atlantis and sunken cities and megaliths, extraterrestrials, all that kind of stuff. Grew up with a strong dose of Johnny Quest cartoons and Lost in Space and Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do today is, a lot of my stuff is archaeological, basically an archaeological writer. And part of my interest is in giant megalithic building. And so the largest megaliths in the world are actually found at Baalbek, Lebanon. And here's an old photo. Some of the megaliths there at Baalbek weigh over 1,000 tons. 1,000 tons. Even megaliths that are 5 tons or 10 tons or 20 tons are major megaliths. When you have a megalith that's like 1,000 tons, you're talking about giant stones that are almost impossible to move. In fact, they have just found at Baalbek. Baalbek, by the way, is in Lebanon, right near the Syrian border. This is a very dangerous place to go today. Just recently, in the quarry at Baalbek, they found what is now the heaviest known quarried stone in the world, and it weighs 1,650 tons. So the whole idea here is, why would people want to build with such gigantic blocks of stone? Is it because they just want to do things in the most difficult way that they can? It's not how we're going to build today. Building things where we build out of cinder blocks and things like that. But if you can move and say levitate. You need like anti-gravity, you need levitation to move these kind of stones. And to build with this kind of stone, it has to be easy, not difficult. And that's part of the thing. Archaeologists have a hard time explaining this. Teams, 1,000 slaves have to be dragging these stones around, trying to move them and then stack them up on top of each other. It seems like an impossible task. This photo that you're now looking at is actually at Jerusalem. It's part of Solomon's temple at Jerusalem. This is also a gigantic block of stone that weighs around 1,000 tons. So like Baalbek in Lebanon, Solomon's temple in Jerusalem is also built on a foundation of huge blocks of stone. In fact, they don't even know how big this stone is because they didn't find it until really the 1980s when they cut a tunnel along the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem so that they could see it. And that exposed this giant block of stone that the woman is standing at. And if you look at her, she's got her hand, she's got her hand here on other smaller blocks. They're still megalithic, but you see how perfectly fitted that is and articulated. I mean, this is something very, very special. So in a sense, King Solomon's temple is also built on some older superstructure that's gigantically huge. Now, just recently, they found also what is a giant monolith or obelisk in the ocean off of Sicily. All right, and it's underwater. It's a fallen menhir or obelisk. There are over 200 known sunken cities in the Mediterranean, and they're not built underwater, these cities. So here we have megaliths and things that are underwater. This is a picture of the unfinished obelisk in Aswan. It's an aerial photo. This is also, we'll get more into obelisks later. This weighs about 500 tons. Obelisks are monolithic megaliths, monolithic in the sense that they're one giant piece of granite. Just quarrying and moving and even standing up an obelisk is incredibly difficult to do, and exactly what obelisks are about and why Egyptologists do not know, but we'll get into that more later. The whole idea with my books and the Ancient Aliens and whatnot is that civilization is much older and much more technological than we give it credit. And we have the stories of Atlantis. This is here a depiction of what the capital city of Atlantis was supposed to look like. Atlantis is a civilization that allegedly was over 10,000 years ago. And that would have been supposedly when people are Stone Age. But what's happening is that mainstream archaeology is pushing civilization and high technological civilizations farther and farther back into the past. And in fact, now in India, they're talking about how in southern India, how in Tamil, they're part of this lost land of Kumari or of Lemuria or something. This would be a sunken land between southern India and Sri Lanka and Australia and whatnot. So all over the world, I believe, there are sunken ruins. There are gigantic megaliths. They're in South America. They're in North America, actually, the largest megaliths are the Olmecs and also what's at Monte Alban in probably Huaca. What you're looking at here is a site in Peru called Ollantaytambo. It's on the way to Machu Picchu. When you get to the top of the Sun Temple of Machu Picchu, or Ollantaytambo in this case, this is what you see. Huge 50-ton, 80-ton blocks of granite just lying around, scattered. They've been quarried and dressed, but they're part of some temple that was either destroyed in some war or cataclysm. And this is how this temple looked in Inca times. It's how it looked during the Spanish conquest, and it's how it looks today. And even the Peruvian government, they can't move these giant blocks of stone. And what is on these on many of these blocks is this. And this is very important, and I write about it in my books. It's what's called a keystone cut. These T-shaped cuts, which are cut into, they have to be cut into two stones. So you're going to have a T-shaped cut here, and then there'll be another stone on the other side with another T-shaped cut. And they can be hourglass cuts too, and some other shapes. And then a metal clamp is poured into the two stones, and it spans both stones. So this is called a keystone cut and a keystone clamp. This is a very unusual way of fitting gigantic blocks of stone. And we're going to see more of these. They are all over the world, these keystone cuts like this. They're in South America, they're in Egypt, they're in Vietnam. They're also at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. This is a scene of the area of Pumapunku. Here we're seeing more of these keystone cuts. Now, this is an unusual thing. And the idea that people all over the world are going to develop this unusual system of cutting these keystone cuts, pouring metal clamps into it, that they would originate some technique like this by themselves in Vietnam, in Egypt, in South America, in other places, all by themselves without any connection. And that's what mainstream archaeology has to say. These keystone cuts, which are exactly like the ones in Peru and in Bolivia, are the same in Vietnam. They're identical. And in fact, they're also cut into granite and basalt blocks very hard. So to mainstream archaeologists, they say there can't be a connection between these archaeological sites, but clearly there has to be. Now in Ancient Aliens too, we've talked, they have promoted a lot of the H blocks, which are at Pumapunku, which is at a part of Tiwanaku in Bolivia. And these blocks too are very, very specially articulated and cut. So they're granite blocks, but they're perfectly cut and made, and they're almost identical, each one. And it's quite an amazing thing to how they all fit together. So here we go. But what mainstream archaeologists are saying is that this is a pre-Inca ruin, but that these people didn't know writing, they didn't have iron tools, they didn't even know the wheel, supposedly. So how? Tons. So clearly, this is being done by a very, very advanced civilization with very high technology. This would be extraterrestrials or possibly very, very advanced technology created by ancient civilizations on Earth, having a technology that we can't really explain. Their technology is just beyond what we would expect from them. All right, let's move on to one of the great mysteries in archaeology, which are these giant stone balls. They're found in Costa Rica and all over the world. They're cut with granite. They're perfectly round. Some are almost the size of a car. We know that these stone balls, the ones in Costa Rica anyway, are man-made. There's no question about it. They're not natural. And in fact, machinists and stuff say that it's the most difficult thing to actually create is a perfect stone ball. But what are they for? Well, to plug passages so Indiana Jones, can't escape with his thing. They don't have a good explanation. They just don't know what these giant stone balls really are about, why they would create them. First of all, they would be difficult to make. They're solid granite. They find them in Costa Rica, down in the southwestern corner of Costa Rica is mainly where they come from. They're just found in the jungle. It's right near the border of Panama, actually. So they find them down there, and there's even an island just off Costa Rica on the west coast where they've also found some of these stone balls. It's like some cataclysmic tidal wave or something hit Costa Rica and then washed these giant stone balls up into the forest and jungles. But again, they don't know why. When you go to the museum in San Jose in Costa Rica, They have one of the smaller stone balls. It's still pretty big. And they put it and they say, well, the high chiefs, you know, they all got a stone ball in their graves when they died, you know, kind of thing. I mean, that's the museum. And you're like, what? You know, what's this all about? They can't explain it. Archaeologists don't have any really good explanation for stone balls, and it's a mystery. Well, I was sent this. This was a brochure from like 1918, okay? And it was about the building of the electric trolley in Santa Monica in Los Angeles. And because it was an electric trolley coming from Santa Monica, the coast, and then going inland to UCLA and whatnot, and electric trams can only go up a certain grade. So what they had to do was, in Santa Monica, it was 1918, they had to bring a steam shovel. There couldn't be big hills for the trolley to go through, so they had to like actually destroy these hills. So get this, when they destroyed the hill, they found all these stone balls inside it. And they couldn't figure that out either. And then at the time, in 1918, they said, oh, well, these are dinosaur eggs. That was their explanation. And then these balls all disappeared, and now we don't know where they are. They ended up in gardens and parks and around LA. We don't know. But yeah, how about that? A bunch of weird stone balls. Get this. You go up to Franz Josef Land, which is in the Russian Arctic. It's up near Spitsbergen. I mean, no one lives up here. And you go up there and there's stone balls up there too. And in fact, when you go on some Arctic cruise ship to Franz Josef Land, this is kind of what you go and see, these stone balls. They can't explain these either. Why are there stone balls up there in Franz Josef Land? Are they also artificial, man-made? How can that be? And if they're not man-made and they're natural, well, how are they made? There are some natural stone balls. These are still the ones in Franz Josef Land. They're an enigma. Archaeologists don't know what to say about this. They would say that they have to be natural. They can't be man-made, but they know the ones in Costa Rica are. These are ones in Bosnia. There's the area of Bosnia that has a stream, and there are all these stone balls are in this stream. They may be natural, but we don't know. Again, they're round, they're large. There's a place in Mexico called the Piedras Bola. Okay, and this is a place in Mexico where also there are stone balls. They're saying that the stone balls here, they're saying are natural. And they're on pillars of mud and muck. The explanation they're trying to give here, and it may well be the case, is that these are volcanic bombs being fired out of some volcano, and as they go through the air, they spin and they get round, and then they fall, and they're stone balls. I mean, that's kind of the natural explanation of it. There's a place in Siberia, Nazarovo, Siberia, where they also found all these stone balls. And here they are, and again, they don't know what they're doing there. Maybe they're natural, maybe they're man-made. Again, how natural stone balls are made is kind of a mystery. There's a place in New Zealand called the Moraki Boulders. It also is a place of stone balls. They're trying to say these are natural too. These stone balls, they're just along the coast. Again, we don't know what they're doing there. There's a San Augusta in Italy, also has these stone balls. They don't know what they're for. In these ones in Europe, you could almost say that, well, you know, they catapults or something were using these stone balls, but some of them are much too big to be used by stone balls. There's a theory that somehow they were used to move megaliths around, the stone balls. Here are some also in Italy, these stone balls. By the way, if you go to a Target store, you'll see stone balls in front of it. This is this Dubrovnik in Croatia. It also has all these stone balls. They just line them up along the castle walls and stuff like that. Some are pretty big, some are smaller. Maybe they were small enough to be used in catapults or even fired out of a cannon or something. But once again, all these stone balls, they don't know what they were used for. They have no idea. Here's another place, Gongxi in Hunan, China, which is kind of southeast China. And it's a little village there, and it's got all these stone balls. So, yeah, tourists come and they stand around, they take pictures, you know, with themselves at the stone balls. So it's a mystery. I mean, it's really something strange, and it's utterly baffling to archaeologists what these are about, why. These are stone balls in Malta, which is an island in the Mediterranean just south of Sicily. It also has some of the oldest megaliths in the world. It has stone balls. Some of them are very, very worn. It's their limestone. This is Malta with more stone balls. On Malta, they know they're man-made, and I mean, most of these stone balls have to be man-made. What they were used for is the big question. Possibly moving giant megaliths. Okay, now let's go to Easter Island in the Pacific. And this is the museum in Easter Island. And what's there? A stone ball. And it's important. This stone ball is there. This stone ball is probably maybe the size of a volleyball, a little bit smaller. And it's in the museum. It's very important. The perfect stone ball, man-made. Possibly used in the construction there. And when you go around Easter Island, I've been there 3 times, they will take you to a place on the north side of the island where people don't live. Everyone lives in this one little town on the south side, to this place where there's another stone ball. And they tell you on Easter Island that this stone ball is the most important thing on all of Easter Island. And it, you know, they don't have a fence around it. It's in a little kind of rock corral. But on Easter Island, this is the most important thing. They call Easter Island the navel of the world, or the center of the world, and this stone ball is the center of the island. But again, they have no explanation for that. Why is this stone ball here? And again, it's man-made. They don't have an explanation. And yet, it's the most important thing on the island. So let's look more at Easter Island. This is actually the center of the island, which is a crater called Rano Raraku, and it is the quarry for the giant statues. And many of the giant statues are around this. It's an extinct volcano. So as you start walking up to it, what you see are the huge Easter Island statues. They're just standing up. Some are lying down. They're leaning. On the island itself, the quarry is in this area here, and the statues, most of the statues are here. It's where they originated. But what the Easter Islanders did at one point was they put statues all around the edge of the island. And what they said was, so the quarry's right in here, but then they put statues all around the edge of the island, and the statues faced inland. And they put eyes in the statue, and according to the Easter Islanders, they said, we're from an island that sunk, a continent called Hiva. And our island, Easter Island, is the only thing left of this lost continent that's now underwater. But to save our island from sinking, we had to put these statues around the island, put eyes in them, and a power radiated out of the eyes of the statues and kept the island from sinking. And they called the power coming out of the eyes manna, like manna in the Bible, where manna comes from heaven. The same word. That's also a Sanskrit word, manna, as well, which in this case means energy. A strange thing about Easter Island is that this corner over here is a volcano. Easter Island is 3 volcanoes over in this area. When Jacques Cousteau went there with his sons on the Calypso, they had an ultralight, and Philippe Cousteau was going to fly the ultralight off of the Calypso and fly around Easter Island. And they all told him, they said, well, don't fly near this one volcano over here, which is this part here, because it has a magnetic anomaly. And in fact, on the maps, it tells you, magnetic anomaly, your compass won't work right. And they told him, don't fly over here because all the controls in your ultralight will go crazy. He ignored them. He flew his ultralight over there. The controls in his ultralight went crazy, like the Bermuda Triangle or something, and he crashed and was almost killed. They had to medevac him back to Santiago to save his life. So there's some kind of weird magnetic anomaly that's going around with Easter Island. And they claim that they used that to actually move the statues. So part of the thing too, when you see these statues at Easter Island, mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh, well, they just built these, you know, like 1200 AD or something, that the statues are only, you know, 400 or 500 years old, maybe 600 or something like that. And the whole mainstream story is, well, they were Polynesians and they got to Easter Island, which is a very remote island actually. And then they kind of got marooned there, and then they didn't have anything else to do, so they built all these giant statues. And invented their own writing, in fact, too. How about that? So here's the thing. As you go up to the crater that's there, you go up these cut stone steps, and then there's a Tora Reed Lake in the middle of the crater. And around the inside of the crater are more of these statues, and they're all buried very deeply, right up to their chins. And there's hundreds of them, and they're all facing, looking down into the lake. And in fact, it's the same Tora Reeds that you find at Lake Titicaca. So these are these statues that you're looking at on the inside of the crater. And you're only seeing really about a quarter of the statue, because most of it is under the ground and buried. So we'll look at that in a moment. So here are some of the statues that are quarried at Easter Island, and some of them are gigantically huge. I mean, they're so huge. And this is a big question for archaeologists too, is not just the quarrying of these things, but then moving them around the island. And they can't really figure out how they would move these giant things. They kind of, the mainstream idea is that they're moved by walking like a refrigerator, kind of walking it forward, which is a very slow way. The islanders say that the statues moved themselves and walked around the island. That's what they say. So look, this is what these statues are really like at the crater. They're under 20, 30, 40 feet of soil. I mean, how would all this soil build up in just just in a few hundred years on Easter Island? They can't explain that. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, it's like some kind of volcanic eruption buried them, or a tidal wave, some kind of cataclysm. But yeah, the islanders themselves weren't erecting these statues and then covering it in 40 feet of soil. So it would seem that these statues are really, really old. I mean, thousands and thousands of years old. This is what the statues look like by having the eyes inlaid in them. This is in the museum. So the statues they were alive, according to the Easter Islanders. They had these special eyes that energy came out of. This is a very unusual statue that's also in the museum at Easter Island. They've only just shown it. It's unique, very, very bizarre. It's actually of a woman. You can see her breasts here. This is a very, very strange statue. There's nothing else on the island like it. And I mean, you just got to wonder, who this is, what kind of person, they are depicting here. Another strange thing that is only recently, in the last 10 years, they've been showing on Easter Island is this thing. It was found in 1960, this head, and it's a kind of alien-looking head. It's also very, very different than the other statues on Easter Island. And people have speculated, oh, must be a gray alien head or something like that. Also on Easter Island are perfectly cut and fitted megalithic blocks, big lichen patches on them, at a place called Vinapu, which is similar to Vimana, Sanskrit word. And this kind of construction is identical to the kind of construction that you see in Peru. Perfectly fitted blocks of stone. And in fact, if you were to see this wall somewhere around Cusco or something, you would just think it was a normal wall there in Peru. So you can see again the perfect fitting of these blocks. And that's something else when you see, like the H blocks, ancient people don't have to perfectly fit these granite blocks together, but they do. And it's because they are doing everything in such a high-tech way that it's how they do things. They might as well make it perfect and fit these walls in together. Now, Thor Heyerdahl found what was a very unusual statue, and that statue is kneeling, and it's a unique statue on the island. So this was completely buried. Thor Heyerdahl and his team uncovered it. So this is a statue that's not standing up. He's on his knees, and his hands are on his knees as well. And this is a type of posture that's very unusual. It's called the Quizuo posture. All right, and the Quizuo posture is you're on your knees, your hands are on your knees, and your head is out. And it's a kind of a posture of sublimation to a king or something. Like if perhaps you're going up to Queen, Elizabeth or something, and then you would get down on your knees and she's going to knight you with her sword or something. But this is an unusual posture. So here we're seeing that posture from Shang, China. The statues from 1700 BC. All right. Here is an Egyptian statue, the same Quizuo posture. He's on his knees with his hands on his knees. It's a special kind of a statue. Here's another Shang Chinese statue. He's in the Quizuo position. Notice he's got a mohawk haircut. Popular back then. These are statues at Tiwanaku. Okay? They're also in this Quizuo posture. They're on their knees with their hands on their knees. These guys are wearing turbans too, by the way. All right, here's an Olmec statue. This is from the Gulf area of Mexico here. He's also wearing a top knot. He's in a Quizuo posture. This is another person, a statue in Quizuo posture. This is from the Indus Valley civilization in India and Pakistan that goes back to 3000 BC. So here's this unusual posture, and it's all over the world. Now, back to Easter Island briefly. The Easter Islanders created their own writing, supposedly, called Rongo writing. But that writing is almost identical to the writing of the Indus Valley in ancient India. This is a Rongo tablet, just a drawing of one, with all the designs and the writing. What these figures are is a kind of what we would, in Indian stuff, they call it mudras, where it's kind of like on the Navy, how you're showing flags and your arm is out and one arm is out and you're holding up flags. Kind of like we would talk with Hawaiian sign language, and also in ancient India and the Mayans and the Olmecs, in a statue or any painting, how you're holding your arms, your hands, your fingers, everything has meaning of the way that everything you're doing. And that's what basically the script of Easter Island was like. It was also written in what's called a Bostafidan pattern, or as the ox plows. That's an unusual way of writing, where you write one line to the right, but the next line is going right to left, and then so each line is alternating. That's an unusual way of writing. The Easter Islanders wrote it that way. The Hittites wrote that way. This is Hittite. Doric Greek was also written that way, as the ox plows, left to right, right to left. So here we go, the whole idea in Easter Island and the Pacific, that there are megaliths all over the Pacific. Easter Island would have had to have connections to South America, although mainstream archaeologists dispute that. They don't want transoceanic traffic. But the whole Central Pacific, is 1/3 of the Earth, is a vast area of megaliths. And in fact, in Micronesia, on the island of Ponape, and they've had this in the Ancient Aliens in one of the early segments, is this amazing city built out of over 250 million tons of basalt. It's not even built on the island, it's built into the ocean. Basalt logs prismatic basalt logs are stacked up in over 100 islands, and walls 30 feet high. This is in the ocean. And there's so much material was used in this city, 250 million tons, that entire mountains of basalt would have had to be disassembled to provide the material to build this city. This thing is the 8th wonder of the world. You have to go there really in a boat. You go through at low tide or high tide. You're walking through. There's all these artificial islands, huge walls of basalt stacked up, and a lot of it is actually underwater. I'm a scuba diver, and I've scuba dived here. So here we have something that's not easily explained. And the islanders say that all of this basalt was magically flown through the air from the other side of the island. And in fact, archaeologists have told me on this island, I've been there like 5 times, and they've said that, you know what, if we could just find the place where they got all this rock, that would solve a lot of the mystery of this place, although they couldn't solve how they built it and stuff like that. And in fact, on the far side of the island, this complete opposite side of the island, it's on the west side, is this basalt mountain, which they call chicken shit rock. And it's a basalt plug with columnar basalt. And I mean, this would have been a place where they could have gotten the basalt, but the mountain that they got their basalt is completely gone. They don't know where that mountain is because 250 million tons of basalt were taken from there. All right, so we'll stop talking about megaliths for a minute, and we'll talk about cone heads. Yes, cone heads are real. So if you go to Peru, in fact, cone heads exist all over the world. This is known in mainstream archaeology as dolichocephalus, having a cranial deformation. You're going to have an extended cranium. Some of these craniums, these ones are from Paracas in Peru. This is the desert area of Peru going south of Lima. This is a place, this is a very, very dry area of the Atacama Desert, and there's many necropolises there, so we're able to find a lot of well-preserved skeletal material where skeletons and skulls are very well preserved. And these guys are some weird-looking dudes. Not the kind of guy you probably want to meet in a dark alley on a rainy night. They've x-rayed them. What they have not done is done a lot of DNA and genetic testing, which is kind of expensive. They probably don't want to do that. We're talking, I mean, there are hundreds of these skulls here. And Giorgio and I were down there a couple of times, and just a good episode of his show. Now, of all the skulls, this one is perhaps the most unusual. Now, the whole thing is that with these cone heads and these guys with these extended craniums, there is a way of taking children and head binding. You bind their head, and you can shape the head into these cone heads. And we know that ancient people did that. And they were doing it around the world, and that's another strange thing. But the thing is, as you become an adult, you have plates in your head, and they begin to fuse. And you really have like 3 or 4 plates in your head. When you're a very tiny infant, these plates haven't fused yet, and that's how you can shape the skull. But this skull is very unusual because, and we'll see another slide in a minute, he does not have the normal plates in his head that a normal person would have. And here's now what we can see. So here's the top of his skull. But yeah, you're not seeing this fusion of the plates coming together here that you would see in a normal human skull that was being manipulated. So yeah, this is anomalistic. This skull is maybe an extraterrestrial here. Even if humans can have these manipulated cone head skulls, they can't look like this. So this skull is, in a sense, non-human or of some other species of human. And that's one of the questions with this whole conehead thing is, were there people, or say extraterrestrials in this case, that just naturally look like this, with these elongated heads, and that other humans then wanted to look like them, and so they were doing the cranial deformation. And by the way, this goes on all over the world. And that's another thing too, is whether infants and babies are actually born with these extended craniums, or whether they're born with a normal cranium like we have, and then it's through head binding and moving the cranium, you create these elongated cone heads. Now look, one of the strange things is that these guys are all over the world. They're not just in South America, they're in Egypt. This is Meritaten, as a statue of her, one of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And yeah, she also has this extended cranium. I mean, she's a cone head too, with her head going back. This is not a normal skull, but this is what she looked like. And in fact, Tutankhamun is also a cone head too, and statues of him look like that. Now you have the Anunnaki figures from Sumeria. And this is what's called an Ubaid figure. It's from a archaeological dig in Iraq, northern Iraq, at a site called Ubaid. And so they call these Ubaid figures. He's a cone head. He's got the elongated, and he has what's called coffee bean eyes. In mainstream archaeology, they're going to say, yeah, the eyes, which look very unusual, they call them the coffee bean eyes. So here he has cone head, elongated cranium, and the strange eyes. These are what they're saying is the Anunnaki, some kind of Sumerian gods, and quite possibly, of course, extraterrestrials. This is also what they look like. These are statues, just statues. We don't really have skeletal remains from Iraq and, I mean, other places. You need very, very dry desert areas to have those. So, look, in Sumeria, this is a Sumerian cylinder seal. Here you have like three guys in a flying disc. All right, they're sitting there. They're in a disc with wings. It flies some kind. In ancient India, in Sanskrit, they call these vimanas. Is their name for these aerial vehicles. And in fact, if you go to India, every Hindu, every Buddhist knows what a vimana is. They're familiar with the famous Indian epics of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. There's many other books which talk about using these vimanas, flying around. They have these airships, they have battles, they go places, and they get very technical. All right, let's now start talking about Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was a Serbian immigrant to the United States. He was probably the greatest inventor who ever lived. His inventions are lighting all of America and the entire world today. He invented what was really called a three-phase motor. That's alternating current. I mean, the electricity we use today was invented by Tesla. But Tesla is kind of a suppressed person. A lot of people don't know who he is. Tesla invented things in the 20s that are still science fiction today. Later, they demonized Tesla. They turned him into the mad scientist. In fact, in the first Superman cartoons in the 1940s, Tesla battles this mad scientist who's trying to take over the world, and it's clearly Tesla. Tesla died during World War II, actually. Here's Tesla in his lab in the late 1890s. There's Mark Twain there with him, one of his buddies. Tesla would do all kinds of special lighting experiments and things like that. And one of the things that Tesla championed, after he had actually essentially electrified America and Canada, starting with Niagara Falls and the first power plants there. And so New York City and Buffalo, New York, and Toronto were the first cities to really get modern electric lighting, although it was demonstrated in Chicago early on. Tesla would talk about all kinds of things, death rays, anti-gravity airships. Everything was electric with him. He was an amazing eccentric. One of the things with Tesla, though, he was a total space cadet. He was a terrible businessman. He was a very odd person. He was never married. He had all kinds of oddball phobias. He had no idea of how to run a business, how to, take care of his bank account or anything like that. He was just totally into his science and his inventions, which he would just envision in the sky and then write them down. I mean, the more you know about Tesla, it's amazing. His big student was a guy named Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi was, he studied with Tesla. He was also a genius like Tesla. Marconi was given the patent and usually the credit for inventing the radio, although later the patent, they all said that Tesla was really the inventor of the radio. But Marconi, what was interesting with him is there's a lot of myths and legends about Marconi. Marconi was a very, very good businessman. And unlike Tesla, he became this multi-millionaire who lived on a special yacht in the Mediterranean called the Electra. But Marconi mysteriously, supposedly died in 1936, even though he was young and in good health. And he vanished, and 100 scientists and with all his money and stuff, they vanished too. And some books in Mexico and in Italy and in Peru came out. They said that Marconi went down to Peru or somewhere in South America, Colombia or even Venezuela or something, and built a secret city before World War II. And this is kind of the origins of this idea, if you've ever heard of it, of a secret high-tech city somewhere in South America that's a space base. And in fact, one of the James Bond movies, it has that as the plot, Moonraker. And in James Bond Moonraker, that's what they do. Bond goes to this secret space city in the Amazon where they're building, they have their own space program. And that's actually kind of based on the sort of legends of Marconi. So the whole thing with Tesla and his ideas goes back, and particularly with levitation, anti-gravity, goes back to Einstein and what's called the unified field. Einstein said that magnetism and electricity and gravity all manifest from another force, and Einstein called that the unified field. So according to Einstein, you would have an equation for electromagnetism, and we have that equation. But according to Einstein, with the unified field, you would have an equation for electrogravity and an equation for magnetogravity, because magnetism and gravity and electricity are all manifestations of this other force, the unified field. So once you can control and understand the unified field, now you've got anti-gravity. You've got electric spacecraft that you power them up. They're not, and this is part of the whole mystery of UFOs in a sense. When you see a flying triangle flying through the sky, a flying saucer, a flying diamond, whatever it is, some giant glowing sphere hovering, it's not a rocket. It's not a jet. It's electric. It's doing some kind of electric anti-gravity power. I mean, there seems no question, and that would be the understanding of the unified field. Just in May this year, these interesting photos were taken of this UFO hovering over Dayton, Ohio. And here it is, and this thing is looking like a kind of arrow or lightning thing. It was just hovering in the sky over Dayton. And Dayton, by the way, is a major Air Force base, okay? This is not just a normal city in Ohio. And people saw this for hours, and it was just motionless in the sky in daylight over Dayton. And yeah, I mean, clearly this is not a rocket, this is not a jet. This is something that's anti-gravity. It's just hovering motionless in the sky over Dayton. And you would think, I mean, this could be extraterrestrials, although perhaps here this is something that the Air Force actually has, which is pretty incredible. So I thought, you know, this is all pretty recent, really. And whenever you have a good daylight photos of UFOs, they're always interesting. I've always been interested in all this technology, the technology behind UFOs. And we published a number of books on anti-gravity and free energy devices, all that kind of stuff. And this is from a guy in Britain. His name is Paul Potter. He wrote a book called Gravitational Manipulation of Dome Craft. He's actually vanished. We can't find him. We owe him money, royalties for his book, but we don't know where he is. And but his whole thing too is of spinning and anti-gravity, of wave packets. It all gets pretty complicated, and it's interesting books. It's too complicated to get into right now. But Tesla would talk about death rays and things like that. Even the Tunguska explosion in 1908, some people have said that was Tesla doing that. Tesla did invent all kinds of different death rays like this, where high-powered energy waves come together. And it's where they all come together, that's where the energy explosion is. One of Tesla's death rays had to do with mercury too, and it was kind of like shooting pellets of electrified mercury bullets. And really the main thing about Tesla today, that's the legend of Tesla, is the towers he built. This whole idea of wireless power. And what Tesla did, he invented these special towers in the 1920s. He first went to Colorado Springs because of the high altitude and the dry climate to do tests. What Tesla wanted to do was broadcast electricity the way a radio station or a television station broadcasts a radio program or a television program. But in this case, you're actually broadcasting power. In the 60s in Colorado, I was a Cub Scout, and I remember building a crystal radio set. And that crystal radio set was a radio set with a quartz crystal and some wound, copper wires, and it picked up. It was a radio, but it didn't have any battery or anything in it. It was powered by the radio signal itself, and the crystal that was in the crystal set would then transfer that power, and you'd have your little headphones and you were listening to the radio without any kind of battery power at all. So in that theory, what Tesla wanted to do was build these towers, and he started to build one in Long Island, New York, and it was called the Wardenclyffe Tower. And Tesla was using all of his money that he had, and J.P. Morgan was financing it. And according to Tesla, these towers would be built all around the United States. This is the 1920s. And they would put this power out, and then Tesla's anti-gravity ships would draw power from these towers, and they would have these death rays and stuff on it. So to try and make it clear to you, this is today, when you put a lamp on a table, you have to find an outlet and plug it into the wall. But with Tesla's tower system, you'd put that lamp on your table and just turn it on. But there was a problem with this. And when J.P. Morgan, once he found out what Tesla was doing, there was no way they could meter this energy. And essentially, you couldn't charge people for the power they were getting. All you could charge them for was the lamp that they bought. And J.P. Morgan thought about it, and he said, I don't want to get into the lamp business. I want to be in the electrical business where people pay every month for a power bill. And that's okay. But that completely killed Tesla's plan for these towers and this wireless power. They completely stopped building the towers. The whole thing came to a halt. The FBI came and dismantled the tower at Wardenclyffe in Long Island. After that, Tesla then became something of a recluse, and he lived in the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. He was known on his birthday, because he was still very famous in the 1930s and even in the early 40s. So on his birthday, the press from New York City would come to his hotel room and they would ask him about his latest cool inventions or whatever, and Tesla would tell them, well, some new death ray he was working on or something like that. And that's kind of the end of Tesla. And then Tesla died in 1943 during World War II. It's now been claimed that the Nazis came and secretly murdered Tesla and took his plans. And the day Tesla died, the FBI immediately raided his studios and his hotel room and took all of his papers. But here we go. These kind of illustrations that you're seeing here, these are from magazines from the 1920s and the 1930s. There were magazines called like Electrical Experimenter and things like that. And they were showing Tesla's vision of having these towers, these anti-gravity ships around it, big powerful beams coming down, searchlights. And in fact, it's interesting because in the late 1800s, and if you saw Noe's thing early this morning, I think you talked about that, where in the 1890s too, these airships were moving around America. They called them the mystery airships, and they started in California, and they came through Texas and Colorado and Chicago. And one of the properties of those airships was often that they had these powerful searchlight beams on them too. That's often talked about. But who was making those airships and stuff, they don't know. Extraterrestrials perhaps, or some kind of mad scientists. So here again, this was Tesla's vision of these airships, these towers, death rays and beams of fighting weapons. I mean, it's very futuristic kind of thing, even today. But this is 1925. All right, so now let's go beyond Tesla, and we'll go to Obelisks. Now, a very unusual group that started in Chicago and Milwaukee in the 1930s, then moved to California, was a group called the Lemurian Fellowship. They eventually ended up in the San Diego area. And they claimed in their material that in ancient Atlantis, there was what they call the Max Tower. And the Max Tower was a giant crystal tower that pumped energy into the atmosphere, like Tesla's the towers. And so this was, the Max Tower of Atlantis was like Tesla's towers, was putting out energy for these Atlantean airships. This would have been 12,000 years ago or something like that. So here you have some giant crystal tower, monolithic, that's putting out power. Seems pretty fantastic, doesn't it? I mean, almost seems like impossible kind of thing. Well, there are monolithic giant crystal towers that exist, and they're called obelisks. Obelisks are mainly found today in Egypt, but they're also in Ethiopia. Supposedly there was an obelisk in front of Pumapunku. Obelisks are monolithic crystal towers. An obelisk needs to be made out of granite. Granite is a rock that's infused with tiny quartz crystals. All through granite, and different types of granite have larger crystals, but an obelisk is a giant crystal tower. And they weigh about 500 tons. They're gigantically huge. In Egypt, they can't explain obelisks. They don't know why the Egyptians were quarrying, moving, and then erecting these giant obelisks. And there's dozens around Egypt. And these ones are in Luxor, at Karnak Temple in Luxor, which is in southern Egypt. They were in various parts of Egypt. They were quarried at Aswan. There's very few books about obelisks. There's maybe only 4 or 5 ever written on the subject, and I wrote one of them. It's a subject that Egyptologists can't talk about. They don't know what to say. In one of the few books about obelisks written by an Egyptologist and published in Egypt, he says that obelisks represent a ray of the sun. That's all they do. Just, a ray of the sun coming down, or if you're familiar with Egyptian iconography with Akhenaten and Nefertiti, rays of the sun would come down with a little hand on them, and they're touching. You'll see that in Egyptian art and stuff like that. So here's the Egyptologist saying, yeah, they're quarrying, they're moving, they're lifting. How you can even erect an obelisk is very, very difficult. NOVA program in the late 90s tried to do it. It's one of the few programs about obelisks, and they couldn't do it. Just even a small obelisk. They could not raise it and stand it up. So the idea that obelisks are just all this effort, and it's a lot, is just to represent some ray of the sun in a temple. In fact, they would have had to build these temples around the obelisks, like Karnak Temple. So it's baffling. So the idea that obelisks have some other purpose, I think, is a good one. Here's the unfinished obelisk, an old photo in Aswan, to show you how gigantically huge it is. I mean, these things are huge. And just quarrying them and lifting them. My friend Chris Dunn, who's an engineer from Britain, lives in Illinois now, runs a very high-tech machine shop. Yeah, he maintains that obelisks have got to be, they had to be quarried with machine tools, digging tools, and then lifting them and moving them is all incredibly, incredibly difficult. Here's the unfinished obelisk too. Now what happened with this obelisk, and it's so important because it's still lying in the quarry today, and here's how it looks. Here's Christopher Dunn himself, down inside the trenches. I'll go back. So what happened with the unfinished obelisk is that they were quarrying it. An obelisk has to be perfect. There cannot be any flaw in it, no cracks or anything. And what happened was, as they got down, he's there in the grooves, as they got down and they trenched the obelisk, they have to trench it on all sides and then start cutting underneath it to get it out of the bedrock. But as they started to go underneath the obelisk, they discovered that it had a flaw. And there was a natural crack in the granite right there that they couldn't see until they got there. But once they saw that there was a crack, that was it. All the quarrying effort that they had gone through came to a halt. They couldn't use that obelisk because it had a crack in it. It has to be perfect. And so in this case, obelisks are tuned. They're tuned and like a tuning fork. They're crystal towers, and probably, in my mind, as I talk about it, this is the Washington Monument here being hit by lightning, just to give you an idea. And the whole idea, I mean, at the very least, these obelisks are some kind of giant acupuncture needles for the earth, or something like that, at the least. But if you use Tesla's system, and you're going to need, power plants and stuff like that, yeah, you can now start putting power. You're going to have a power plant, near at the base of the obelisk, or getting power to it. But that obelisk is an antenna, and it can function like a Tesla tower, and it can put out energy, and it can receive it too. I want to say one thing about the Washington Monument, which every time you watch, Wolf Blitzer on TV, he's sitting there and that Washington Monument is right behind him. I mean, it's a symbol. The Washington Monument is a symbol of the power of Washington, D.C. But the Washington Monument is a faux obelisk. It's a fake obelisk. It's not a real obelisk. It's meant to look like one, but it's built out of blocks of stone. It's not a monolith. It's not a single giant block of stone. Okay, so it's not a real obelisk. All right. So obelisks are in other places around the world. They're in Ethiopia. This is a place called Aksum. They were probably erected and then carved later, I think. There's a whole bunch of obelisks there in Aksum. By the way, the Ethiopians will tell you they think the Ark of the Covenant is there. So there's a park there with different obelisks. And in fact, the largest obelisk that's known in the world is the broken obelisk at Aksum. It was so huge, it came crashing down onto another gigantic megalithic building and broke into like 5, 6 pieces. Even the pieces of this obelisk are huge. They think that this obelisk weighed from 520 to 560 tons. So it's one of the largest, or the largest obelisk in the world, the broken one. Larger than any obelisk in Egypt even. So here it is. These are pieces of the gigantic obelisk. And it fell onto a building that they call a tomb. And they can't get into it now because the obelisk has fallen on top of it. But the legend is, in Aksum, is that underneath that building that the obelisk is on top of is a secret anti-gravity machine. And even the Lonely Planet guidebooks tell you that. You know, you're like, what? You know, oh yeah, that's right. And yeah, and then when Graham Hancock was in Aksum in the 1980s, the priests there told him that they have the Ark of the Covenant there, and without the Ark of the Covenant, they couldn't have raised these obelisks because they needed all the incredible power and levitation power of the Ark of the Covenant to make these things. And in fact, there's a building there. Here we go, still more of the obelisks there. I want to show you this. This is still in Aksum. But see, here are those keystone cuts again that I was talking about very early on. And see, these are these type of, you have megalithic blocks perfectly fitted together, but then you have the keystone cuts, and molten metals are poured into that, okay? So there's a metal clamp. I mean, that's just such an unusual way to do things. So here you go. Here's actually one of the metal clamps. So liquid metals are poured into these keystone cuts. This is in, and they're in Ethiopia, they're in Egypt, they're in Peru, they're in Vietnam, they're all over the place, they're in Greece. So that's a very unusual way to do things, and why people all over the world are using this same unusual technique. You also have these solid doors and things like this in Ethiopia. This is the special church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion. And according to Ethiopians, the Ark of the Covenant is inside this building. It's probably not the real Ark of the Covenant, but some kind of imitation. We'll go briefly to the quarry above Aswan. It's about 12 miles away, where they had to, Aksum, I mean, where they had, this is the quarry, giant mountain. They had to go up here. They quarried the obelisks, 520 tons, hauled them down. Here's part of some megalith that they were quarrying there. You can see part of it. These are giant rocks that just never quite made it to where they were meant to go. But again, you're building with giant blocks of stone that weigh 100 tons, 500 tons. Why are you even trying to do that? We just don't know how ancient people would be able to even move these things. There's another place in Ethiopia, which are these rock-cut churches, and they're cut into solid rock as well. You have these also in India. These things are also monolithic. They're all solid pieces of rock into these churches. They're cut out of granite. The stories that they have here, there's a place called Lalibela in Ethiopia, and the stories there are that during the night, angels came and did all the work. That's what they say at this place. It's quite an amazing spot. Ethiopia, I really liked it. A fantastic place, very nice people, very spiritual. And so you have these things, big lichen patches and stuff like that. Okay, so we were looking at the obelisks and whatnot. There at Lalibela too, they're just cutting through solid granite and things like that. You really need like power tools to do stuff like this. It's pretty astounding, all the work. All right, let's keep talking about obelisks. There's a place in England, in Yorkshire, called the Devil's Arrows. They're obelisks, and they're there. They're near a highway. They're older than Stonehenge. British archaeologists have no explanation for this. The local legends are the devil came and then threw these giant obelisks around, and they call them the Devil's Arrows. There's 3 of them. They're highly, highly worn. So you have obelisks basically in Yorkshire. Here's some more pictures of them. More pictures of the Devil's Arrows. Here we go, looking up. Yeah, they have these grooves and stuff. This is all, probably originally they were just normal obelisks like we would see in Egypt, but these got worn. Other people, even people try and take them down. There's another place in very far eastern Yorkshire called Rudston, and it's a little church, and it has an obelisk on it too. And here's an old picture of it, and it's just one. And so they actually built an old church there in this little graveyard. It's an obelisk as well. So here we have obelisks in England. We've got them in Egypt and in Ethiopia. Here we are at the Rudston monolith, and more pictures of it at the church. All right, so that's that obelisk. In fact, they put a little tin cap on it to keep it from eroding it even more. Now here's a strange story. Back in the 70s, when the Bermuda Triangle was very popular, and Charles Berlitz's book on the Bermuda Triangle came out, like Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken. It sold millions of copies. It was a huge, huge best-selling book. And it spawned lots of imitations. So lots of people started writing books about the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Triangle, and all that. And then people turned to the Great Lakes. And it was, oh, the Great Lakes Triangle. Yeah, that's it. There's all the mysterious ships, just disappearing there in the Great Lakes. And that's all fine. That's all interesting. And there's several books came out. Well, this one was written by a Canadian named Hugh Cochrane, The Great Lakes Vortex. And what's interesting about this book is that one chapter in this book is about an obelisk. And it's about this, it's on the Canadian side in Ontario. It's called Presqu'île Provincial Park, right up here. Now the story that Hugh Cochrane tells in his book is this, that the Presqu'île Park right up in here in Ontario. So back in the early 1800s, this is the story, an obelisk was coming out of the lake near the shore and was standing in about 200 feet of water. And supposedly people would row out on a nice summer day to this obelisk, and the tip of the obelisk was just coming out of the lake. And people could see the obelisk, and it was an obelisk going straight down into and it was standing on the bottom of the lake. They would tie their rowboats up to the tip of this obelisk, have a picnic out on the lake, and then they would go back to shore. This is the story. And then, in like 1805, there was an Indian chief, kind of like Tecumseh did this, but there's some other guy. And he was having some problems with the people around there, and he made some big curse, and he said, oh, big storm's going to come, and it's going to destroy, you and your town, or something like that. And then what happened was there was this big, big storm on the lake, and there was a ship also that was lost on the lake, and it was coming right into this area. And the people knew that the ship was out there, and they built a big bonfire on the shore to try and guide the ship back, to the land. And this big, big storm. And then when that ship never made it, and when it all cleared, the obelisk was gone. And it had fallen over. And they think that the ship hit it and forced it over. And that obelisk is not there anymore. So what a strange story. The idea that obelisks are standing in Lake Ontario. How does that make sense? All right, well, if you think that is strange, let's go to the moon. All right, here's the moon. The moon's very strange. Lots of strange craters. And in the 1960s, okay, before Apollo missions, they were sending probes, and the Russians were doing this too. And they took a photo of this part of the moon, and an astronomer in England, his name was Blair, noticed that there were obelisks here. And he calls them the Blair Cuspids. This is a photo of it, but we'll go to all right, so here we go. This is the photo. The Russians got into this, and that's this diagram, and here's the photo. All right, this is what according to the Russians, this is what the Blair Cuspids on the moon look like. They're obelisks. And this part of the whole thing with structures on the moon, you have to look at them with shadows. And so they're casting shadows, and this is what? And so it's from the shadows that they cast at certain times of the day that they're deciphering what this is. So apparently the Blair Cuspids are a series of obelisks on the moon. So what about the moon? when NASA went to the moon and they dropped one of the stages of the lunar module on the moon, they claimed that the moon rang like a bell for hours and vibrated. And so that led to certain theories of books that came out in the 70s that the moon is hollow and is some kind of artificial structure that's a hollow, literally like the Death Star in the Star Wars movies, that it's an artificial construction. There are craters on the moon, like this one, that supposedly they can't find the bottom of. A couple of books were written in the 1970s. One was by a guy named George Leonard, a book called Somebody Else is on the Moon. And he's the one who really talked about this. And yeah, there seems to be a structure going down inside the moon. So the idea, NASA later said too, that the moon is not part of the Earth. It's made of different material. And they said that the moon is actually older than the Earth. And that it had come from some other solar system and brought here. And this is all very strange. Now, how would you make a hollow moon? Well, here's an interesting idea. Let's say you went out to the asteroid belt and you got a big rock, and with all your super technology, you heat that rock into a blob of molten rock like glass, and like a glass blower takes molten glass and then blows a big glass ball in his studio, and it's hollow. You could, in theory, do that with an asteroid. And you could melt it and then inflate it, in a sense, blow it up, and what you're going to have is a hollow moon made of all these metals and things like that. And in fact, the moon is very, very rich in titanium and chromium and rare metals that are being used, also for spaceflight. In fact, just recently, they came up with this new super metal that's supposedly the strongest metal. This was just a few weeks ago. And it consists of titanium and gold. So mixing titanium and gold together makes apparently this super duper strong metal. All right, let's keep talking about these weird towers. So the Russian Zond 3 photographed what is apparently a 20-mile high tower on the moon, 1965. There it is on the right over here. So this is some tall tower, apparently tower structure that's on the moon. One thing I'll say about the Russian space program, the Russians are far more open, and we'll talk more about oddball fringe science and extraterrestrials. They're not so afraid to say that there's structures on the moon, that moon's occupied. They're far more open in a governmental sense about the idea of extraterrestrials and things like that. This is that tower on the moon again. And here we go. Supposedly, they're the remains of domes on the moon. My friend Mike Barra, who's also on Ancient Aliens, we've published a couple of books with him where he claims that these parts of domes are on there. There are structures on the moon that seem to look like ziggurats. There are kind of hangars and things. Ancient Aliens has done an episode recently of all kinds of unusual structures on the moons, even derelict spacecraft. I mean, a lot of this is apparently in photos, that NASA's taken, and the Russians. And now we have the Chinese and the Japanese and Indians going to the moon, taking photos of the moon. It's important that we're given real information about what's up there. These are allegedly photos of derelict craft and other things like that on the moon. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what's up there, what's real, what's faked. NASA, of course, it's difficult to get a straight answer out of them. And in fact, critics of NASA say that NASA means never a straight answer. Pyramids on the moon, again, it's looking at things that are in shadows and stuff like that. This is another Russian photo which it looks like some big Tesla kind of energy type structure on the moon. I mean, exactly what all these things are. I mean, it's, in my mind, yeah, the moon is probably full of all kinds of weird stuff like this, including obelisks, incredibly. And it makes me think, again, that obelisks have a purpose, a major purpose that's technological. We're almost done. I know I have just a few minutes left. Let's go to Mars real quick. Here's Phobos, one of the two moons of Mars. The moons of Mars are very strange. I can talk more about our moon, but I don't have time. Here's the Mars moon, known as Phobos. Phobos is an oddball moon. They're small rocks. They go in opposite directions. The moons of Mars are very strange. And the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed what's like an obelisk on Phobos. Here, this thing here. So once again, you're looking at the shadow. Look at the shadow on this. This is some very tall, narrow thing. It's like an obelisk. I mean, what is this doing on Phobos? Here's a close-up of it. With that, I mean, with that shadow, we're so far away and taking these photos. I mean, this is out in space. So, we can't get a clear picture of exactly what this is, but it seems like it's some obelisk. Here we are, whatever, some computer imaging of them. This is some oddball feature on Phobos, and it doesn't seem that it's natural. Now, on March 25th in 1989, a Russian probe was entering the Martian atmosphere. This is Marina Popovich. She's a Russian cosmonaut, a Soviet. This was just at the time when the Soviet Union was breaking up. But what the Phobos, and the Russians named their probe the Phobos 2, and it was to go to Phobos. As the Phobos probe was photographing Mars, it suddenly took this photo on March 25th in 1989. Here, I'm gonna shift it around. Okay, just so we can see it like this. So here's Phobos, and what the probe took was a picture of what seems to be a huge cigar-shaped, elongated craft coming into view of the probe. Okay, so they're taking a picture of the Martian moon Phobos, but this other gigantic craft. Then the Russians had it turned towards the Mars, and this is the last picture it took, and it was of some object coming up, apparently from Mars, towards the probe, and then the probe went dead. And this is the last photo it took. So in a way, that the Russian probe was shot out of orbit, apparently. So it was only able to take a few photos, but once it took photos of that craft, it was basically shot out of orbit. And that was the story that Marina Popovich told on the news. This is the other moon of Mars. It's called Deimos. It's also a strange Martian moon. The two moons are very odd. Supposedly, some of the new photos of Mars are showing all kinds of mechanical parts and debris on Mars. There are pyramids on Mars. There's even supposedly a sphinx on Mars with a pyramid in the background. Other kind of structures, it would seem, on Mars that are buried in the sand and the dust. And one last thing I'll say, just to end up here, is with our solar system. And there's an oddball thing with our solar system. In the 1860s, there was a German mathematician. His name was Bode. And he created a mathematical algorithm for our solar system. And it had to do with going out from the sun. And according to Bode's law, as you go out from the sun in certain mathematical spaces, there should be a planet. And it was a kind of logarithmic kind of thing that he came up with. So they then applied it to our solar system to see if he was correct. And what he found was that with his law, his logarithmic program, our solar system seemed to make sense in that Mercury, the first planet, should be here, and then there should be a second planet here, and then as you go out, you're going to get farther out planets. But there was one part of our solar system that didn't fit to Bode's law, to his law, and that was the asteroid belt. And according to Bode's law, according to him, there should be a planet there. But instead of a planet, there's all these rocks in space. So many have suggested that the asteroid belt is the remains of a planet that exploded. Okay, and the asteroid belt is all in a certain area of where this planet should be. And in fact, that's the Superman story. Superman's from Krypton, this planet, but it blew up. He made it to Earth and became Superman. But everybody else was killed in the exploded planet. But it would seem that, yeah, the asteroid belt may be the remains of an exploded planet. One last little thing, some other interesting. Ceres, the largest of all the asteroid belts, has these bright spots on it. It's like it's almost being lit from the inside or something like that. You know, NASA itself wanted to investigate this. This is the largest of all the asteroids. Yeah, okay. So here we go. And then one last thing is we'll go to one of Saturn's moons, the Iapetus. So Saturn has a bunch of moons. Iapetus is one of them. It's rather strange. It has a kind of crater holes that kind of look like, well, I was talking about the inflating a moon or something like that, an umbilical. But what's also strange about Iapetus, it's like got this seam around the moon. Can you see it? It's almost like it was like put together, like some, I mean, yeah, it's like, right. I mean, again, they're looking at that. It's just some artificial oddball thing. I mean, they're like, you know, it goes completely around the moon. I mean, they're you know, geologists are saying, yeah, we can't really figure this one out. So there we go. All right, and that's it, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Would you be willing to take 3 or 4 questions?
Sure.
Okay, by popular acclaim, would you like to ask David just a few questions on the microphones? How many would like to have a few questions asked? Okay, if you want to step up to the microphone, and we'll just take maybe 3 questions, 4 questions, because I know based on the feedback I'm getting on the social media, you have a lot of questions. Anna, go ahead.
Oh, I'm already on social media, am I? Well, okay.
Hi, David. Have you heard about the helium-3 on the moon? This material.
Helium-3, is that what you're saying? Helium-3.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Why is it on the moon and it's not on Earth? Supposedly the moon came out of the Earth.
Yeah, and apparently it doesn't. Although they're kind of going back to that. Although in the 70s, NASA was saying that the moon's not part of the Earth, it's all in the Earth. Now, they kind of realized that that was maybe an oddball thing to say, and it kind of meant that the moon was from some other solar system, which probably is. So they're not saying that. The moon is very, very rich in metals and mining materials. And in fact, George Leonard said that too, that they're mining the moon. And I go into that, and I just don't have time today. I show there are mining vehicles that are moving through the moon, and they make these tracks and stuff. So yeah, George Leonard and other people speculated that there's literally these automatic machines that are just going around the moon, scooping up the moon and processing the metals and stuff like that. And if you're mining the moon, that's a great mining concession. I mean, you're getting valuable metals. And in fact, those mining machines are a lot like in Star Wars. In the first Star Wars machines, they have those kind of things. They're just going through the desert, or if you remember in the very first movie. They're these like kind of big factories that are just moving around, and what they're doing is scooping up the moon and processing it.
Anybody else have a question? Last chance at David. Come up to the microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, I was just wondering because I have this theory. What do you think of maybe us humans were rejects from another universe and they dropped us off here?
Maybe. Well, some people have said, this is a prison planet. We're under quarantine. They let us go to the moon a couple of times, but that's it. So we don't know. I mean, who knows what's going on? That's an interesting idea. Thanks.
Anybody else? Back there? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Aswan, is that in the country of Egypt?
Yes. Yeah, it's in southern Egypt. Aswan is very far south Egypt, getting towards Sudan. So it's that's a.
And the island where a lot of the asphalt was found. Where is it?
That basalt. That's in Micronesia, on an island called Ponape. Okay, up north. Yeah. Then, in fact, that's the capital now of the Federated States of Micronesia, which is near Guam. Okay, south of Guam.
And the last thing, when a satellite is shot out of orbit, what really happens to it? Does it just go off?
Yeah, it just tumbles off into space and it loses all power. It's now just a dead piece of metal going through space.
All right, thank you.
It's not sending signals back to bases or anything.
Okay, big hand for...
Thanks, everybody.